friend Carlos and I would always go out shoveling people's sidewalks after big snowstorms to make some quick cash. In like 2013 or 2014, our town was in the midst of a blizzard. It was dark, windy, and snow was building up fast. Our school already announced it would be closed due to snow the next day. So with nothing to do that night, and it being only like 8 p.m., we went out with our shovels and started ringing doorbells, offering to shovel sidewalks for cash. We got a lot of no's before we got our first yes. We made around $15 each on our first house. We made our way across the neighborhood. A lot of people weren't interested, and most people just wouldn't open their doors. We got a second house eventually, and made a little more money on that one. Then I remember a long gap between that house and the next house that would say yes. It was a small corner house, but usually corner houses would pay more. We rang the bell, and the door cracked open, but whoever was on the other side didn't show their face. They did, however, speak from the other side. A deep man's voice said, "Who's there?" I pitched our snow shoveling service to the man on the other side, requesting $40 in return since it was a corner house. There was a short silence. Then the voice on the other side said, "Oh yes, please, $40 is fine." There was a hint of nervousness in the voice. I said all right, and then the door shut. I didn't see the man's face at all. I turned to Carlos and said that was weird, but we started the shoveling. I started from the front porch down the walkway to the driveway. Carlos worked on the sidewalks. I couldn't help but stare at the house every once in a while, and at one point when I turned to a window as I was throwing the snow from my shovel onto the ground, I saw who I assumed to be the homeowner. He was standing at one of the windows, watching me. Could I see anything of his face? Not really. He was standing in a dark room. A little uncomfortable it made me, but I tried my best to ignore it and continue shoveling. Of course, I'd occasionally glance back, and he would still be there. Eventually, I finished the driveway, just around the same time Carlos finished the sidewalks. So we started our way back up the walkway to the front stoop. But before getting to the stoop, the door opened, and the man inside shouted, "Go around back." Carlos and I froze, looked at each other, then obeyed his command. We stepped through the snow-covered grass to the backyard gate. I opened it and pushed it through the rising snow, which was slightly difficult. Then, there we were, in the man's backyard, which had a small awning that we stayed under to get out from the falling snow. We waited by the back door, expecting him to come outside eventually with our money. We waited for over a minute and started getting antsy. I started pounding on the back door since there didn't seem to be a doorbell. Then there was the sound of a window being rotated open, followed by the man's voice again, saying, "Come inside." Carlos and I looked at each other again, and then I led the way in through the back door. All the lights in this house were turned off. It was actually so hard to see anything, really. "Hello?" I said. I heard a man's voice from another room call, "I'm counting your money on the table." It seemed he was inside the kitchen, which was connected by a small door through the room we entered from. We walked closer to the kitchen, which appeared to be lit up through the window only by the streetlights standing on the side of the house. I stood at the doorway, intending on looking through the crack of the door to see where the guy was standing in the kitchen, but I couldn't see through the crack because it was blocked by him. The man was standing on the other side of the door, looking through the crack. I turned and pretended I didn't see him. I made up some bull, like telling Carlos we forgot something outside. We left the house, and the man didn't say a word. As soon as we got outside, we grabbed our shovels and sprinted away from there. All of our hard work shoveling that house was for nothing. We got back to my backyard, put the shovels away, and went inside to warm up and rest for a little bit. Carlos and I chilled for a little bit, then it was time for him to go. He went out the back to get his shovel, but he came back inside, concerned, telling me to come take a look at something. There was an extra, fresh set of boot marks in the snow. You may ask how we knew. That's because one set trailed from the gate to the back door to the shed in the corner of our backyard. Carlos hurried back inside, and we told my mom. We live in a very poor, relatively unsafe neighborhood, so my mom was quick to believe us and get 911 on the phone. Police showed up relatively quickly considering the horrible driving conditions, and they went to investigate the shed. Carlos, my mom, and I watched through the back window as the police pulled out a man from the shed. He had a matching shirt from what I could see through the window back when we were shoveling that property. He was undoubtedly the house owner. He later admitted to police that he was going to attempt to break into the house when we all went to sleep. Why, however, he never answered. Police also said he was very intoxicated when he admitted this, which made me think, what on earth was he going to do to us in that kitchen if we didn't leave his house? It was an early December night, and we were having our first snowstorm of the year. I was in my bed watching some low-budget Christmas film while texting various friends, mostly my friends George and Pat. We used to text in a 3-person group chat. Everything was as it should be, when I felt my heart drop to my stomach as a bang came from the window right next to my bed. I opened the curtain, but there was no one standing out there. Then, pow, there was another, as I was still looking out the window. It was a snowball. Someone was throwing snowballs at my window. I stood on my bed to get the best possible view out the window, but I didn't see anyone standing out there in the snow. So I actually lifted open my window to call out. It was almost immediately after I shouted out the window that I heard someone's laughter. Not a child's laughter like I was expecting it to be. It was a deeper voice, could belong to anyone from the age of 17 to 40 for all I knew. I shut the window and started texting in our little group chat saying I knew it was one of them messing with me. The fact that they now weren't responding made me even more confident. I didn't close the curtain as I knew whichever one of them it was, they weren't done messing with me. And just like that, another snowball hit my window. I lifted the window up quickly to try and catch them, and there he was standing in the snow, waving to me. But it wasn't either of my friends. It was some guy in a black beanie and black coat with gloves on, laughing. He started approaching the window. I hurried and slammed it shut and twisted the little lock. I also closed the curtain so that he couldn't look into my room. Both of my friends had texted back by now with question mark responses. Then there was a single knock at my window, and it started being fiddled with and shaken. He was trying to lift it open. When it all stopped, I waited a couple minutes before peeking through the curtain. It seemed the coast was clear, so I finally went to go tell my mom and dad about the whole thing, who came to have a look out my window. Sure, my dad believed me, he literally saw the footprints in the snow, but he just didn't see it necessary to call the police, figuring whoever was out there gave up. My dad turned on all the outside lights just as a deterrent, and then they went to sleep. I stayed up in my room with the lights off, continuing to watch movies. My door clicked open. I said get out, assuming it was my little brother. The door shut, so it seemed he listened to me. Silence, except for the TV. I watched for a long while, then a click in my wood floor. I turned, halfway through repeating get out in a louder voice, when realizing it was not my short little brother. It was that tall man in the black beanie and coat from outside. He started waving to me again at the doorway, then put his pointer finger up to his lips. He started walking over to my bed, and that's when I got up, ready to defend myself. He approached faster now, easily grabbed me, and covered my mouth with his leather gloves. There was a wet white towel in his glove that he was pressing to my face for a long time. I tried to break free and scream, but I couldn't, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went black. I woke up in my living room with my parents and police hovering over me. An ambulance arrived shortly. My dad heard the commotion going on in my room and came to find the man over me. My dad, much larger than that man, managed to overpower him, but not long enough before the police could arrive. He ran out the front door and disappeared. I was quickly brought to the hospital. Thankfully, I was all right. If you're wondering, the man climbed in through our downstairs window. It's a little-known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold, sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds. and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard. After a full, rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares, I was way too far and disoriented to make my way back to my cabin. I had to seek refuge somewhere else. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees. No lights on, but I still had to try the door. I hit the door with my fist a few times. No answer, but I could hear footsteps on the other side, approaching the door. I expected it to open, but it didn't. I shouted that I'm lost and need shelter. The door cracked open, and I heard a voice say, "Come in, leave your boots by the door." I waited a bit, expecting him to open the door fully and formally greet me as anyone would, but that didn't happen, so I pushed the door open myself and entered the dark cabin. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch that the man then told me to sleep on. As for the man, all I saw was his silhouette on the far side of the room. The little light from the candles didn't extend that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and laid down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me crash here till the storm blows over. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the most bizarre thing. Folks are strange up in the mountains. If he wasn't up for conversation, I'd just get some early shut-eye. I closed my eyes, though the level of darkness with my eyes closed wasn't much of a difference. I was subconsciously waiting to hear the man's footsteps leave the room, but they never did. I opened my eyes, and his silhouette was still in the corner of the room, just standing there. I felt the need to say, "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna get some sleep now, thanks." No response. I turned to my other side so that I wouldn't be tempted to just keep opening my eyes to check on him. Some time passed, but without having heard his footsteps walk away, the curiosity was eating away at me. I turned over to look again, and this time, I swear to God, the silhouette of the man was closer by at least a few feet. I couldn't make out his face, but the slight glow from the candles would just barely trickle around the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my belongings and thanked him, but I said I had to go. I didn't look at him anymore, because I don't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the blizzard. I came across another cabin down the hill, this one with the lights on. I knocked on the door, and some old man and his wife answered the door. They welcomed me in immediately and were very inviting. They gave me some hot tea and offered me a spot on the couch. I told them my story about the freaky cabin up the hill, and the two looked at each other, puzzled. The woman confirmed 2 times the cabin I was talking about. Then she said, "Honey, the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. That cabin has been vacant ever since."
Back before my girlfriend Jenny and I officially started dating, we would still hang out all the time. We both snowboard, and her family has a little cabin-type house in Vermont not far from Stowe Mountain Resort. This was around our maybe 10th time hanging out. She invited me to go up there for a weekend with her to go snowboarding for the first time together. It was like a 5-hour drive. As we neared her little house, we spent about half an hour on this very windy, secluded road on which we'd pass occasional driveways that would lead up into properties blocked off by walls of trees. We were way up there in the mountains. The sight of other cars by this point was something to behold. It really felt like we were alone up there. A lot of the driveways didn't even have tire marks in the snow, meaning even a lot of the houses were void of people. Jenny told me that's because a lot of the houses here were owned by people out of state, just like her situation. I was going like 30 when she yelled at me to slow down, it's coming up, so I hit the brakes, and this little opening in the trees that I otherwise would have missed came up. We drove this narrow trail in 4-wheel drive, which led to this small house covered in snow. It looked incredibly cozy. We parked, and first thing we did was turn the heat on in the little house. We unloaded our stuff inside, and since it was already getting dark that night, we just cooked some of the food we packed for dinner and watched a movie. Pursuit of Happiness, actually. So the house had just about everything, heat, electricity, except running water. Her family had jugs and jugs of water for important things like washing hands and plates and stuff. but there was no working toilet, so she told me we had to use the outhouse outside. I only had to go pee that night, so I just went out to the front deck and peed into the snow. It was also snowing out that night. We fell asleep at some point during the second movie we watched, and we woke up pretty early to our phone alarms. We wanted the freshies on the mountain. We started getting ready to drive up to the ski resort. After breakfast, I had to go out to the outhouse though. I ran out to the outhouse in my shoes, and my feet started to freeze. On my way to the outhouse though, I saw footprints in the snow. They were kind of big, but I couldn't tell if they were boot marks or animal prints. I followed the trail, and it actually wrapped around the house and then went into the woods. I called Jenny outside, and she came to look and said it was probably a black bear since they're everywhere up here. So I went, did my business, and we set off to the ski resort, where we had a good 8-hour run. Afterwards, we stopped at a diner to eat, and then went back to the house. By this point, it was pitch black outside and snowing again. We set up a fire and got the heat on full blast and started blasting some music. We started to drink, and eventually I had to break the seal and pee. But also, if I was throwing my boots on anyway, I figured I'd do all my business in the outhouse. I ran out into the snowstorm and to the outhouse once more. This time I slammed the door shut to prevent snow and cold air blowing in my face. I heard the blasting music from inside the house still, but then over that, I heard the crunching sound of footsteps in the snow, passing the outhouse. "Jenny?" I yelled. No answer. The footsteps just walked away. I brought my phone with me, so I just texted her, "Are you outside?" It didn't immediately deliver though, because my cell reception sucked up there. A few minutes passed and I was still in the outhouse. I was just about to finish when the blasting music suddenly stopped. It was just pure silence, minus the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground outside. As soon as I stepped out of the outhouse, I realized it was pitch black out here now. The lights from the house were off. I figured maybe the power went out. I used my phone's flashlight and noticed a fresh pair of footsteps in the snow leading to the house. I followed the footsteps to the front door, where they seemed to stop, then continue around the house. I banged on the door and yelled Jenny's name. Suddenly the door opened and an arm pulled me inside the house. It was Jenny. She slammed the door shut and locked it. She whispered that there was a man who tried to open the door, which she locked as soon as I went to the outhouse because she was scared being alone. When she saw the person at the door wasn't me, she cut the power and hid in a corner in the living room and watched in horror as a stranger walked past the living room window slowly, looking inside. I came to the door only a couple minutes after this happened. Jenny told me about the secret cellar in the floor that her dad kept a couple rifles and shotgun in. Navigating in the dark, I found the handle to it and lifted it open. Now using my flashlight, I climbed down the little ladder and grabbed one of the guns off the wall. We then waited on the couch in the dark, afraid to turn the lights back on, exposing ourselves to whoever was out there. The closest neighbors were not a short walk. Jenny said it wouldn't have been any of them, and odds are they weren't even in Vermont right now. Once again, the only sound was the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground outside, until the sickening sound of footsteps in the snow outside returned. I took the loaded gun and marched to the front door, opened it, and shot like 3 rounds into the air, screaming. The footstep sounds were gone. I'd imagine they ran off, and the sound of the shots echoing into the air masked the sound of the footsteps running away. We left the next morning under the recommendation of her father, who said it's best to not be there at the moment. They don't really have anything they're worried about being stolen, so we just got the hell out of there the next day. At least we got our full day of snowboarding in. That horrific night was definitely an experience, to say the least. I live in England, and for others who live here, you may remember it snowed quite a lot in the winter of 2018. I used to love the snow, but after what happened, I'm no longer a fan of it. My immediate family was going to visit extended family in Cornwall for the weekend. I didn't want to go. I don't get along with them very well, and would much rather have stayed at home, so I faked an illness. I wasn't expecting it to work, but it did. They went without me and left me in charge of the house, which I was fine with. For the record, I was 16, so it's not like they were being irresponsible. Saturday was great. I went on my computer, watched Netflix, and played in the snow with my dog for a bit. She loves the snow more than anything. That evening, I was just finishing up a mission on Call of Duty World War II, when I started to get hungry. The house is full of food, but mostly food that takes a lot of effort to prepare. I decided to go to the fish and chip shop in the village. By now, it was getting dark outside, and the snow had stopped falling, but it had gotten really deep. I grabbed a tenner and crammed it into my pocket before pulling on a coat and heading outside. The route I take involves going down a tree-lined snicket that has a few street lamps for light before coming out near the main road where the chippy is. By the time I got there, it was dark out. I got some chips, battered sausage, and started to head back home. I was halfway down the snicket clutching my meal when I heard it. In the trees just to my right, a twig snapped. My head whipped around, but I couldn't see anything. My heart was racing, but I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. Until I heard it again. 2 snaps in rapid succession. Now I was scared. I began to walk home fast. I forgot about what was coming up. The last section of the snicket, which was almost pitch black. The bulb in the street lamp had blown months ago, and the council couldn't be bothered to fix it. I sighed with frustration and worry, and carried on walking before I heard it. The continuous sound of twigs breaking stopped for a moment, before being replaced by crunching. I stopped and turned around, and my heart stopped. I could see a black figure silhouetted by the lamp further down the snicket, a black figure who was running straight at me. I turned around and full-on sprinted through the snow. I burst out of the snicket and ran to my house, which was only about 10 meters away. I got my keys out as I was running, and I jammed them into the lock as soon as I was close enough. I threw myself into the house and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. I looked out of the door window and saw nothing. The streets were deserted. It wouldn't be that bad if it ended there. But it didn't. Paranoia kept me up late, and close to midnight, the dog started making a racket, barking and scratching at the back door. I knew deep down what she was barking at, but I didn't want to believe it. I went to the back door, but it was too dark to see anything. I steeled my nerves and flicked the light switch to once again see nothing. The back garden was empty. I dragged the dog away from the door and went back to watching TV, but something was nagging me. I couldn't think what it was. The back garden was undisturbed apart from my footsteps leading up to the back door from when I came home. That's when it hit me. I came in the front door. My veins turned to ice, and as I walked to the back door, I realized something was very wrong. I could feel cold air on my face. I walked around to it and stopped dead. It was wide open. The build of my house gives 3 different options when you enter the house. The living room, where I was, kitchen, or stairs. As I slowly backed into the wall, I heard a light but clear thump upstairs. With that, I grabbed the dog, grabbed my phone, and ran straight to the neighbors, and due to it being midnight, I rang the bell about 10 times before getting a response. They were furious about being woken, but when I told them what was going on, they let me straight in. The police took about 40 minutes to arrive because of the snow that was once again falling heavily, and when they did come, they did a thorough search of the house. They found nothing. The footsteps were all filled in by the snow. But the CCTV showed a figure running straight out of the back door soon after I left and hopping the fence at the end. They disappeared into the woods behind my house. It kills me to know he's still out there and that he knows where I live. I'm sleeping more steadily now, and we have a new lock on the door, and for a while I was constantly worried for me and my family's safety. I'm 27 years old. This happened when I was 26. My mom passed away a few years ago. My dad is blind. My dad sold a very successful energy company when I was young though, so we have money and multiple properties which we rent out. Obviously, I have to do my part in helping out given the circumstances. I help manage most of the properties. My dad lives in his 1-story condo about 10 minutes away from us. The condo is walking distance to the village, which has grocery stores and anything he could need. My sister Katie and I live in the house that we all used to live in together as a family. Our dad gets by himself with basic things like shopping and taking care of himself, but we have to bring him to further away things like doctor visits and whatever he can't walk to. This happened during a winter storm. Katie was at her boyfriend's house half an hour away from home, so I was home alone. The snow was coming down heavily, and I thought to call my dad and check in on him. He has a landline phone because that's easier for him to use rather than a smartphone. He does have a smartphone, but he's stubborn about using it sometimes. When I called, it rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. So I called again, and the same thing happened. Normally he would rush to the phone to call back whenever we call, so I waited a few minutes before calling one more time when I saw he wasn't calling back. He once again went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back. I called Katie asking if Dad said anything about going out in this weather, and when she said no he didn't, that's when I got worried. I didn't like the idea of him being out in a blizzard, so I drove over to his condo. The roads were so bad that there were hardly any cars on the road. My phone kept vibrating, giving a winter storm advisory warning. These were no conditions for my dad to be out walking around in. As I pulled up to his condo, I did notice footsteps in the snow going both ways, indicating he must have gone out and just gotten home. I knocked on the front door and yelled, "Dad, it's me." And a few seconds later, the neighbor's wife, an elderly woman named Hannah Laura, opened her door and said hello with a smile, telling me her husband just gave my dad a lift to the store a few minutes ago. We talked for a minute, then I thanked her as she closed her door. I figured I might as well let myself into my dad's condo to wait since I was already here. Naturally, before looking for my key, I tried twisting the doorknob, and to my disappointment, it opened the door. My dad didn't lock the door again. I told him so many times to stop doing this because one day someone would break in, even if we live in a nice area. I shut the door behind me, but then I noticed something peculiar. There were melted snow tracks on the wood floor, leading past the living room to the little hallway, which leads to my dad's room. "Dad?" I called. Did he get home just before I got here? But that wouldn't have explained Hannah Laura's husband not having returned yet. Well, maybe it could have. Maybe he dropped my dad off and then ran his own errands. These were the thoughts I was having as I was slowly following the tracks. I called Dad one more time, this time louder. I didn't hear the shower running, so why wouldn't he be able to hear me? Something wasn't right. He would have answered. I started calling my dad's cell number, and I heard it in the bedroom down the hall. Maybe he was home. I went down the hall into my dad's empty room. He wasn't there. I saw his phone vibrating on the nightstand next to his bed. I looked at the ground and saw the melted snow tracks lead to his bathroom in his room. The door was closed. I went over to knock on it and said, "Dad?" one final time. No response. I slowly opened the door, and the bathroom was empty. But there was something unusual I noticed right away, and that was the shower curtain. It was pulled shut. My dad always leaves the shower curtain pulled open. I know this for a fact. On top of this, the door being shut was also unusual. He leaves all doors and such open to make navigating easier for himself. I looked at the shower curtain for a moment, then closed the door, walked to the front of the condo, shut the door, and called 911. I waited in the front of the condo, the only entrance and exit. Police showed up surprisingly quickly given the conditions. We went back inside of the condo together and right into my dad's room, where we saw a man sitting on the bed with his hands in the air, as if he knew we were coming and he waited there. My dad got home about 10 minutes after this, in time to hear everything that happened. The man who broke in lived a few units down according to his ID. That meant this man had been keeping an eye on my dad and his place for a while, with plans to break in and rob him. I think I learned where the saying "rob him blind" came from after this. My dad, being the kind soul he is, didn't even want to press charges, but we persuaded him to hire a lawyer. The man was charged with third-degree burglary, and he's still in jail to this day.
I love the sound of falling snow. It's kind of like watching lightning or seeing a shooting star. It's just one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself, but when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings. This happened during one of those snowy nights. I live in a woodsy area. It's not really in the woods per se, but it's close enough. If I wanted to access an expansive, dense forest, I'd only have to drive a few minutes. I didn't have any major obligations the next day, so it was either a Friday or Saturday, probably a Saturday because I remember being slightly hungover from going out the previous night. It also wasn't supposed to snow that night, which I remember specifically because I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months. I was sitting in my room reading a book when it just started snowing, abruptly, as if someone had just casually flipped a switch. I didn't even notice it at first, but by the time I realized what was going on, there was already a considerable amount of snow on the ground. Without thinking too much, I instantly knew what I wanted to do. Take a snow walk, so that's what I did. The spot I drove to is pretty secluded for the most part. It's a local hiking trail that usually doesn't see that much traffic. I stepped out, admired the snowfall for a few seconds, and started walking. I didn't really have a defined plan in my mind.
My only objective was to get deeper into the woods so I could more fully appreciate the snow. After about 20 minutes of walking, I was finally satisfied with how far I'd gone. But then, the literal moment I stopped to appreciate the snow, I heard something. Something that definitely didn't belong there. It was a child's voice. It took me a few moments to even process what I heard. Just as I was telling myself my mind was playing tricks on me, I heard it again. The sound of a little boy yelling, "Hi." I know that sounds pretty benign, but it was just so freaky in the moment. It was quite literally the last thing I was expecting to hear out there, all alone in those woods. The other unsettling thing about it was that I couldn't really tell where the voice had come from. It sounded like it could have come from a number of different directions, if that makes any sense. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. I kept looking around frantically, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I heard the voice again. It was definitely a little boy's voice, only this time, he said, "Up here, silly." Without even processing how freaky of a thing that is to say, I instinctively looked up, and there he was. There was a little boy who looked to be around 9 years old just sitting on a tree branch in a tree not too far away. It was the most bizarre thing. The boy was clearly bundled up for the cold, but how he managed to climb that tree, I had no idea. The lowest branch to the ground was at least 20 feet off the ground. Strangely, seeing him kind of calmed me down a little. It was almost like I had been afraid of not knowing where he was, as opposed to him being there. I walked over to the tree he was sitting on, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. He was smiling this really wide grin that reminded me of the expression someone who hadn't learned to smile yet would make. My sense of security started disappearing the more I looked around, though. For starters, there wasn't a single footprint around the tree he was sitting in, meaning he had climbed up there before it had started snowing, meaning he had been sitting in that tree for at least 45 minutes. And that's not even mentioning the fact that he figured out a way to climb that thing in the first place. Like I said, it would have been exceedingly difficult to do so, even if you had climbing experience. The tree was perfectly straight. He would have had to shimmy up 20 feet. He waved at me, and I didn't waste a second. I asked him how he got up there, and he told me it was a secret. Then he just went back to smiling that awful grin. I didn't know what to do. This kid clearly didn't belong out there, and I felt compelled to do something. But what was I supposed to do? Try and climb the tree to get him down? Before I could think of something to say, he stood up straight on the branch he had been sitting on and said, "Watch this." Then without warning, he leaned back and fell. He fell what must have been at least 30 feet. I screamed. There was nothing else I could do. I watched in horror as he landed directly on his back with a gruesome thud. I thought he was dead. There's no way any amount of snow could have cushioned that fall. I ran over to him, but before I could reach him, he sprung up off the ground and started running away from me. It was impossible. Falling from that height should have been enough to kill him. I screamed again, this time out of shock, and I watched as he ran off deeper into the woods. Even with the bright snow on the ground, it was still dark enough for him to run out of sight. I don't know what came over me. Instead of doing the rational thing and turning around, I ran after him. I don't know why. I know myself. If a situation like that were to arise again, I'd turn around 99 times out of 10. But I guess this was just that one time. That's the only explanation I can come up with. I regained my composure and started following his footprints, knowing he couldn't have gotten far. After a few seconds of running, I started to hear him laughing. Cackling is a better word, honestly. It was really unsettling. It was like he was toying with me, playing a game while I was out there scared to death. His footprints passed a nearby tree, and as I was running past, I felt something latch onto my back. Before I could react, I was tumbling to the ground, and this kid was on top of me, clawing at my neck and shoulders. I started screaming and blindly grabbed at him, but he wasn't letting go. He started wailing too, and I could feel myself starting to bleed. He was tearing into my neck with his fingernails, and I thought he was going to blind me. I managed to stand back up, and with all my strength, I flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground, immediately got up, and ran deeper into the woods, still laughing. This time I didn't chase him. If it weren't for the cuts on my neck and the blood on my hands, I might have just stood there forever. The cuts didn't feel that deep, but there was an uncomfortable amount of blood. I hadn't been wearing a scarf, so I pulled off my hat and wrapped it tightly around my neck. My hands were shaking and soaked with my own blood, and I was having a panic attack. The next 20 minutes are really fuzzy, probably because I was so terrified and I had lost so much blood. The next thing I remember is being in the back of an ambulance, and then after that, I remember talking to some police officers about what happened. I got the medical attention I needed and was asked to recount my story like 10 times. At the time, I didn't realize what was so unbelievable about it. I would only later learn that while I had been in the hospital, the police had searched the area and found nothing. What's worse, they allegedly followed my footprints and only found the one set, mine. I remember being so emotionally distraught when I found that out. I was furious at the thought that they hadn't searched the woods thoroughly, but why would they lie? By the time I was discharged from the hospital and done talking to police officers, I didn't have much energy to do anything other than sleep. I can't remember if this was the day after or 2 days after. Like I said, things got a bit fuzzy, but I eventually went back to that hiking trail. It had snowed considerably since then, so it wasn't too surprising to find that my footprints had been snowed in. I searched the entire forest. It must have taken me hours, but there was no sign anyone had been there. This is still one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me or anyone I personally know.
This happened over winter break my sophomore year of college. I was 19 and had the house to myself for a little under 2 weeks. During the second week, a massive snowstorm hit. The forecasts were predicting something crazy, and they definitely weren't lying. By the time I woke up that Saturday, there was already close to a foot on the ground, and it was still coming down hard. Plows couldn't keep up, and by late afternoon, the roads were basically impassable. I should mention that my neighborhood isn't your typical suburban setup. The houses are pretty spread out, and there's a lot of wooded areas between properties. It's nice in the summer, but in the winter it can feel kind of isolated. That day, with the snow piling up and no cars on the road, it felt even more so. I was bored out of my mind by like 6 p.m. The Wi-Fi knocked out while I was sleeping, so I couldn't even pass the time by playing video games or anything. For context, my only hometown friend is this guy named Ryan, and I knew he was around because I had literally hung out with him the day before. So while I was dying of boredom in my room, I got this idea that I thought was hilarious at the time. I was going to walk to his house and surprise him. The roads were undrivable, sure, but I figured I could make it on foot. It was only about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more. I'd walked further than that plenty of times. Looking back, it was a pretty stupid idea, but I was 19 and bored and thought it would be funny to just show up on his doorstep covered in snow. The first part of the walk was actually kind of nice. The snow had stopped falling by then, and everything was covered in this thick white blanket. The streetlights made everything glow, and it was weirdly peaceful. I could hear my own breathing and the crunch of my boots, but that was about it. There wasn't a living thing out there. About halfway there, the route cuts through this stretch where there aren't any houses for a while. It's mostly just trees on both sides of the road and a few empty lots. During the day, it's nothing special, but that night, especially with all that snow, it felt different. That's when it really hit me how alone I was. It was a really strange feeling. I kept walking, and out of nowhere, I saw headlights up ahead. The lights were pretty far off, but they were coming from the direction I was headed. I stopped walking and watched them get closer. It was definitely a snowplow, and it was moving really slowly. But then out of nowhere, it suddenly veered hard to the right, like the driver had lost control or was trying to avoid something. I watched them cut across the road and disappear into the tree line. There was this muffled crunching sound, and then everything went quiet again. My first thought was that someone had just crashed, so I started running toward where I'd seen the lights go off the road. The snow was deep, and I couldn't move that fast. But the only thing on my mind was the thought that someone was hurt and needed help. It took me a few minutes to reach the spot. I could see where the vehicle had gone off the road, so I followed the tire tracks until I found it. The scene looked exactly as I predicted. A snowplow with its front end crumpled and smashed into a tree. Its headlights were still on, and the engine was still running. I ran up to the driver's side, preparing myself to have to lift someone through the snow. But when I got to the window and looked inside,
There was no one there. The driver's seat was empty. I stood there for a second, not really processing what I was seeing. I thought maybe the driver had been thrown from the vehicle or something, so I looked around. The windshield wasn't shattered though, so they must have still been inside the plow. I checked the passenger side, but that seat was also empty. I ended up pulling the driver's door open in frustration, thinking maybe they had slumped down below the steering wheel, but there was no one there either. It took me a few seconds to realize that the entire plow was empty. There was quite literally nowhere else someone could have been. I remember just standing there in the snow, staring at this wrecked snowplow with its headlights still on and its engine still running, feeling like something was very, very wrong. There were no footprints leading away from the truck. Whoever had been driving the thing had just vanished. It's hard for me to describe what I felt next. I got this sudden, overwhelming sense that I needed to leave. It wasn't a thought so much as a feeling, like something in my gut was forcing me to get out of there. I trusted my gut and backed away from the plow. As I was walking back the way I had came, I heard a voice ring out from somewhere behind me. It was a man's voice, and he was yelling for help. I wanted to turn around and help. That was my goal in the first place, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving. I started running, and as I got further away, I heard the voice yell out one more time. It sounded much closer the second time, like impossibly close. No one could have moved that fast through such deep snow. I didn't turn around. I ran the entire rest of the way to Ryan's house. The joke was pretty much ruined at that point. I must have looked insane when his mom answered the door. I explained what happened, and Ryan's dad ended up calling the police. In the time it took the police to get out there and back amidst all that snow, Ryan and I had gone back and forth about what I'd seen probably a dozen times. He kept asking if maybe I imagined it, or if maybe the driver had walked away before I got there, but I knew for a fact that my eyes hadn't been playing tricks on me. When the police got to Ryan's house, they revealed something horrifying. Apparently they hadn't found any tire tracks on that round at all. They had searched the entire road, but there was no sign that a plow had ever even been there. The officer actually accused me of making the entire thing up, and I had to argue my case. I was practically begging them to believe me. The officer ended up just leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. I stayed at Ryan's that night. I didn't want to walk back home in the dark, and honestly, I don't think I could have even if I wanted to. The next morning, after the plows had finally cleared the roads, Ryan's dad drove me home. I've thought about that night a lot since then, and every time I do, I come to the unfortunate conclusion that what happened to me is just one of those unexplainable things. I guess it's possible that I hallucinated the whole thing, but that terrifies me just as much. I'm Sebastian, and I go by Sebi. This happened back when I was a sophomore in high school, about 7 years ago now. I went to a private school in a nearby city, which meant I had to commute on public transportation every day. Train in the morning, train in the afternoon. It sounds tedious, but honestly, I didn't mind it. Most of my friends lived in the same general area, so we'd all ride together, and it became this social thing where we'd just hang out and talk during the commute. One of the hidden benefits of private school, honestly, getting people accustomed to commuting early in life. I was a runner back then, track in the spring, cross country in the fall. During the off-season, I'd catch the train right after school let out around 3, and it would be pretty empty, usually just the same group of high schoolers heading home. But during the season, practice wouldn't wrap up until after 5:30, which meant by the time I got on the train, it was packed with commuters heading back to the suburbs after work. Luckily, my two best friends Charles and James also ran track and lived on the same train line, so I wasn't completely alone during those late rides. One night after track practice, it started snowstorming the moment our train left the station. It was midwinter, so night is definitely the right term, even though it wasn't even 6 yet. And snowstorm is also the right term because it went from 0 to full-on blizzard in like 5 minutes. We found out while we were on the train that ours was the last one operating on that track. The forecast was predicting a massive storm, and they weren't letting any more trains leave the station after us. The snow only got worse. At one point, the three of us were genuinely wondering if the train was even going to make it to each of our stops, And even so, we quickly realized there was no way our parents could drive to pick us up. The roads were already a mess, so even if we made it to our respective stations, we'd have no choice but to walk home. For James and Charles, that wasn't a huge deal. They were practically next-door neighbors in a pretty lively, dense part of town. Plus, their houses weren't that far from the station. For me, though, it was different. My station was isolated. I'd have to cross a highway and then walk over a mile in this woodsy stretch to get home. I called my parents from the train and explained the situation. They told me I didn't have much of a choice. My dad told me to just suck it up, bundle up, and be careful. James and Charles got off at their stop, and I dapped them goodbye. The rest of the ride was just me and a handful of other passengers, and by the time we reached my station, I was the only one left. The doors opened and I stepped out onto the platform. It was completely empty, just me and a full blizzard. It was dark, but there was decent visibility because of the snow. Everything was white, and the light from the station reflected off of it in this pretty but eerie way. I stood there for a second, taking it in. It was a sight I had never seen before. Usually that station is bustling with cars and people, but with the snowstorm and all, it looked completely deserted. I started walking. There was no point in prolonging the inevitable. For whatever reason, I thought crossing the highway would have been more difficult, but there wasn't a single car anywhere in sight, including snowplows. I actually stopped and looked around, kind of in awe. It was beautiful in a weird way. I started thinking to myself I'd probably never experience anything like that ever again. After the highway, though, came the woods. The only other option was following the road home, but it was really windy and would have added a ton more walking, so I decided to just push through and walk through the woods. I don't know how long I'd been walking, but I happened to glance up after looking down at my feet for a while, and the moment I did, I had to hold back a yell. About 30 yards ahead of me, there was someone standing there, a man. He was facing me directly, almost like he knew the exact path I had to take. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, because he wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt and shorts in the middle of a blizzard, and to make things worse, his face was twisted in this deranged smile. I didn't move. I just stood there watching him, waiting to see what he was going to do. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some explanation, but the shock of the situation was too much for me to handle. I couldn't think or move, and in one abrupt motion, he went from smiling and standing still to screaming and charging at me. It was literal horror unfolding right in front of me. I snapped out of my haze and began running as fast as I could back the way I came, screaming for help even though I knew no one was out there. I couldn't move that fast with all the snow, and I felt him closing the gap with every second that passed. The chase felt like it lasted forever. It was probably 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I finally broke out of the woods and hit the road, and only then did I turn around. He was gone, and that didn't make me feel much better though. I felt physically sick. I followed the road home, and the whole time I kept thinking about my footprints, about how they were quite literally the only tracks in the snow. If that guy wanted to follow me home, it would have been the easiest thing in the world. When I finally got to my house, my parents were relieved. That is, until I told them what had happened in the woods. My dad wanted to go out and look for the guy, but my mom wouldn't let him. Several hours went by without incident. Eventually, my parents went to sleep. I pretended like everything was fine, but I was still freaking out internally. I couldn't get the image of his deranged smile out of my head. And the way he had been screaming was just so unnatural. And the more I thought about it, the more insane the whole thing felt. He had literally been wearing short sleeves. How had he not frozen to death out there? I was making myself crazy, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it and just go to sleep. But of course, I couldn't fall asleep. It was like I was in that 30-second shock after waking up from a nightmare, only instead of 30 seconds, it was several hours. That's the best way I can describe how I was feeling. At one point, I heard a tree branch rattle my bedroom window, which startled me out of bed. I went over to the window to see if I could dislodge it somehow. I pulled back the curtain and literally dropped to the floor, yelling. It was him, that guy from earlier. He was right there, inches from my window, only now I could see him clearly. His skin was purple, like he was freezing to death, and he was bald with this patchy gray beard. My dad burst into the room and just barely saw that guy through the window before he took off. My dad went to go run out in the snow, but my mom stopped him and convinced him to call the police instead, which he did. With all the snow on the grounds, it took the police forever to get to our house. By the time they did, that guy was long gone. My dad didn't care though. The police could have easily tracked his footprints in the snow, which is what I was expecting them to do. But once the officers realized the tracks led into the woods behind our house, they told us they couldn't just go tramping through the woods in the middle of the night. My dad got furious. He got in one of the officers' faces and almost made it physical. In the end, the officers literally left without doing a thing. Nothing ever came of it. The police never bothered to follow up, and I never saw that man again. For all I know, he froze to death somewhere behind my house. But for weeks after that, I was terrified to be in my own home. I still have absolutely no idea how to explain what happened. My name is Gregory, and this happened last December when I was home alone in my house for a whole week. My girlfriend had gone to stay with her parents for the holidays, and I stayed behind because of work. I live in a quiet neighborhood in a small town in upstate New York. The houses are pretty spaced out, and most of the people on my block go away for Christmas, so I basically had the whole street to myself. At first, I liked the idea of the peace and quiet. I thought I would get a lot of rest and maybe catch up on some shows and just enjoy the coziness of the holidays for a bit. But what happened that week still lives rent-free in my head. It was on my second night alone. It was around 6:30 and already completely dark outside. It had been snowing lightly all day, and there was a white layer on my yard and driveway. I was in the kitchen making a simple dinner, just pasta and chicken. Usually my girlfriend is the one to cook our meals. I'm not much of a chef. I turned on the TV in the background to make the house feel less empty, because as happy as I was to have the place to myself for a bit, I wasn't used to it being so empty and quiet in here. While I was eating at the table, I heard something unusual. It really took me a second to figure out what it was. It sounded like singing. I muted the TV and listened. The sound was definitely coming from outside. The singing got a little clearer, and I realized the person was singing Jingle Bells. At first I thought maybe some neighborhood kids were playing around outside, but the voice didn't sound like a kid. It sounded like a grown man. I got up and walked toward the front door because that seemed like the direction it was coming from. The closer I got, the louder it got. By the time I reached the door, it sounded like the singing was coming from right on my front stoop. I felt a weird feeling in my stomach, but at that moment I still thought maybe it was just a caroler. I opened the door, and standing in the glow of my porch light was a man around 35 years old. He wore no hat and his coat looked too thin for the weather, but the strangest thing was that he was completely focused on singing Jingle Bells, staring down at my welcome mat like he wasn't even aware I opened the door. I remember forcing a little smile because I didn't really know what else to do. I'd never gotten Christmas carolers before, but even still, I never heard of a grown man doing it solo. It's supposed to be a group thing from what I know. He didn't look dangerous, he actually just looked sort of confused or maybe slow. I even wondered if he was special needs or something because he didn't react to me being there, he just kept singing. When he finished the song, I expected him to say something, or at least leave, but he just took a breath and started singing Jingle Bells all over again from the beginning in the same slow off-key tone. But now, he was looking up at me, making direct eye contact. I felt my smile drop because it was just weird now. I stood there another minute, pretending to listen even though it felt uncomfortable. I kept thinking he would stop after the second run, but he didn't. He just looped the song. I checked my phone and realized almost 4 minutes had passed while he sang Jingle Bells over and over. Finally, I decided it was enough. I told him thank you in a polite tone, and I slowly closed the door. I thought that would send him on his way. But once the door was closed, I still heard the singing. It continued without even slowing down. I walked back to the table and sat down trying to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. The man didn't seem normal, and it bothered me that he was still right outside my door singing the same song. I wondered if maybe he was special needs and someone was out there with him, like by the street or something, but I didn't see anyone else out there. It made the whole house feel uncomfortable, like someone weird was standing too close to my personal space. I kept eating, but I couldn't focus on the food. It went on for my entire dinner. Finally, after about 10 minutes straight, the singing stopped. The sudden silence actually made me jump because I had gotten used to the singing. I got up slowly and walked back to the front door window. When I looked outside, I expected to see the man gone, but he was still there. He had moved. Now he was standing at the end of my driveway. He was just facing my house, completely still. He was no longer singing, at least I couldn't hear anything from here. He was just standing there in the snow, staring at the door. Something about that felt worse than the singing. He looked like he was waiting. I opened the door a crack and told him he couldn't be here, that this was private property and he needed to leave. He didn't move at all. The whole thing was so unnatural. I finally told him that if he didn't leave, I would call the police. Then I shut the door again. I watched him for another minute from the window, but he didn't budge. I didn't want to actually call the cops because I thought maybe there was something mentally wrong with him and I didn't want to make things worse. So instead, I decided to just go upstairs, lock my bedroom door, and try to relax. I checked out the window upstairs before changing into bedclothes. The man was gone from the driveway. Thank God. I figured the threat worked. I got into bed, turned on a lamp, and started reading my book to wind down. Maybe 20 minutes went by when I heard something from behind the house. I knew instantly what it was, unfortunately. It was the same man singing Jingle Bells again, except now it was coming from my backyard. I jumped out of bed and went to the back window. When I looked down, not only was he directly inside of my backyard, he was already looking up at my window. The man was in my backyard standing in the snow directly below my bedroom window. He was looking straight up at me while he sang. I slid open the window and yelled at him that I was calling the police. The singing stopped instantly. He stood there in total silence for about 3 seconds. Then, he suddenly burst into a full sprint toward the back door on the lower level. The second he was out of my view, I heard the most insane sound I've ever heard in my life. He started screaming at the top of his lungs, not like a normal scream. It sounded like a death metal singer, but even more insane and deranged. It echoed across the yard and through the entire house. Then came the banging. The back door shook violently as he kicked it, slammed into it, and probably tried ripping the doorknob off. I felt the vibrations from the impacts in my upstairs bedroom. I realized this guy wasn't just weird. He was trying to get inside. I grabbed my phone and called 911 right away. I begged them to hurry, telling them a man was trying to break in. I stayed on the line while holding a baseball bat with my other hand. I backed into my bedroom closet and shut myself in. The operator told me to stay hidden. I could still hear the screams and bangs from downstairs, and every second felt like he was going to break through. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the bangs stopped. Everything went silent except for my breathing. I didn't know if he left or if he got inside. I stayed completely still in the closet until the police arrived. They checked the entire outside of the house and confirmed the back door was still locked. The operator said I could come out and meet them. When I stepped outside to greet them, I finally felt like I could breathe again. We walked around the backyard and saw deep footprints in the snow, showing exactly where he had stood while singing to me through the window, and where he had run up to the back door. The footprints then led off into the woods behind my property. The cops went to follow the trail a little bit, but came back because it apparently wasn't worth going deep into the woods at night. They acted like it wasn't a big deal. They told me people act strange all the time, and that as long as I kept my doors locked, I should be fine. They didn't seem very interested in finding him, and that bothered me a lot, but I was too shaken up to argue. After they left, the house felt horribly empty and cold. I kept every door and window locked and double-checked them over and over. At that point, I was over the alone time and just wanted my girlfriend back home. I went down to my parents' place for Christmas Eve and Christmas, thankfully. As far as that man, he never returned. At least, not that I know of. This story is about my Christmas experience from about 10 years ago. I was 6 years old, since my birthday was in November, and I had just finished celebrating. Now we were getting ready for the holiday. My birthday celebration happened on the same day as the famous Odell Beckham Jr. catch. I lived with Cowboys fans, but I was a Giants fan. I remember it being talked about for the rest of the night, and even during my birthday celebration. It was an eventful birthday week, and I'm surprised I remember all of this since I was only 6. I didn't understand football, but I understood that the catch was crazy, so I was just living in the moment and happy it was my birthday, like any other kid. For my birthday, I got tickets to the Mavs-Wizards NBA game on December 30th. I was a Cavaliers fan, but since we lived in DFU outside of Dallas, I knew a lot of Mavs fans, and I was a small fan myself, so I was grateful. It was going to be my first NBA game. Christmas Day was 5 days before, and I got a brand new Odell Beckham Jr. jersey and a Mavericks shirt and sweatshirt as I was becoming a sports fan. I had a great Christmas, but one of my Christmas gifts was another Mavs game, which was on December 27th against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I was so excited to go to both games. The day came, and we went to the game. The Mavs won a close one, something like 112 to 105. It was crazy to see an event like that in an NBA arena for the first time. We left the game and drove home, which was maybe 45 minutes away from the American Airlines Center. The next couple of days were normal, but I was excited to go back to that amazing stadium and atmosphere. This time we went again. I didn't know it would be the last time I went for years. At the last game, we had nice seats, like 7 rows from the court and in the middle. But this time, we were maybe row 20 and in a corner area, so the experience was different. The game was going well, and I was enjoying it. The Mavs were killing them by like 20 to 30 points at halftime. Since I was a child, I wanted to roam around and get food and go to the bathroom by myself, but I was with my parents and only 6 years old, so my parents and I walked to get some food. We waited in line for maybe 20 minutes. My dad went to another restaurant inside the arena to get different food, and I stayed with my brother, who was waiting in line to pay. As we talked to the worker, I walked away to throw out some of the candy they bought me before the game. I walked to a trash can maybe 30 feet away. As I got there, this tall white man came up to me and asked, "Hey, are you lost?" I shook my head and didn't say anything. He said he didn't see my parents around and told me, "Let's go look," as he grabbed my hand and walked with me. I was just a kid, so I walked with him. He took me toward the nosebleeds and said we were going to the intercom so they could announce my name and find my parents. I said okay and kept walking. We got to the top, and we waited for about 10 minutes. He waited until the coast was clear and then tried pushing me towards the emergency stairs or elevator. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember there was no one around. Then I remembered stranger danger, and the guilt and fear started sinking in. I realized I shouldn't go with this man. He didn't have any credentials. When he let go of my hand to go check his phone, I ran all the way back to the stands. As I ran, I saw him standing there with a small grin on his face. I couldn't find my parents, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be somewhere safe. I found my brother, who hadn't told my parents he lost me because he didn't want to get in trouble. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes, choosing not to say anything. The game ended and the Mavs won, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. As we exited, I was quiet. When we got in the car, I was also quiet. My parents seemed confused that I didn't seem energetic, but I told them I was tired. As we drove home, I almost fell asleep, but then a loud honk screeched behind us. It was so loud I almost screamed. I turned around, and there he was. The same man driving a truck with maybe 3 other men inside. I couldn't tell who they were, just silhouettes. My parents yelled at them from our car when they pulled up next to us, but the men just stared. I wanted to say something so badly, but for some reason I didn't. When we got home, I went right to sleep and passed out fast. In the middle of the night, I woke up with chills. I noticed a light flashing at my window. I looked out, expecting something innocent, Santa Claus or something, but instead saw that man standing out there, shining a flashlight into my bedroom window. I screamed and ran to my parents' room, telling them someone was at my window as if it were a first-story window. They rushed outside and searched for maybe 20 minutes. They didn't find anything, and since I was a kid, they didn't believe me. They said it must have been a shadow from a car, but I know what I saw. On New Year's Eve, a couple days later, we were staying up until midnight to watch the ball drop. We were about 5 or 6 minutes away from midnight when the doorbell rang. My parents answered it. I didn't pay attention until I heard the man's voice, and I was 100% sure it was him. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I told them at the game he brought me to the high level, and I ran away and escaped. But they still didn't believe me. They said it was just a man handing out lost dog flyers for his cousin's dog. The night went on, and I was fine. But then a year later, on New Year's Eve, there was a knock at my bedroom window. Keep in mind, I had forgotten about the situation. I got up and looked, and there was a piece of paper on the window that said, "This New Year, you'll meet me again." I gave my parents the note, and they filed a report, but they never heard anything back. Every couple of years, I get terrified of New Year's Eve, thinking that man will come back. I told my parents I never want to go back to an NBA game, saying it wasn't my thing. But now I'm 16, and it scares me that the man knows where I live. I'm considering going to the Cavs vs. Mavs game on January 2nd or 3rd, which would be my first game since then, but I'm not sure. This experience scared me away from basketball and made me always close my curtains. I remember this night way too clearly, and even now I think about how close my family came to something really terrible. It was early December, and we decided to drive up north into the mountains to cut down a real Christmas tree. It was something my wife Marianne and I always wanted to do, and our 7-year-old son Andrew was excited about it too. The weather was cold and cloudy, and the sky had that heavy look where it feels like snow is always about to fall again. To us, that added to the Christmas vibe. The whole ride up the winding roads made me feel like a kid again. It was a while since I'd done something this unique and in the Christmas spirit, and having Andrew so excited about it just brought me back to my youth. When we finally reached the remote area Marianne found online, there were no other cars around in the parking area. There were a bunch of light posts scattered around, so we weren't in pitch black darkness if you were wondering. That's why we picked the place. Still, we did bring flashlights. We parked by a small, unmarked path that led deeper into the trees. There was a lot of snow on the ground still from the snowfall we got a few days earlier, and up this high, the snow took even longer to melt. Andrew jumped out of the car right away and started throwing snowballs at us, so I started throwing them back. We were here to have fun, so of course I was going to try to make it as memorable as possible for Andrew. I grabbed our flashlights and the axe that I planned to use to chop down a tree. We walked up the narrow path with snow crunching under our boots. Andrew kept running ahead, stopping to point at trees he thought might be perfect. The deeper we went, the more the road behind us disappeared, and the only light came from the faint moon glowing behind the thick clouds. It was so quiet that I even asked Marianne and Andrew to stop for a second, just to really take it in. There was not a single sound, maybe a light breeze, that was it. To be honest, if I had been there alone, I'd have been slightly creeped out just off the silence and darkness alone. As we walked deeper onto the trail, we had to utilize the flashlights we brought, all 3 of us. Andrew was having a lot of fun with the flashlight, until the light from the parking lot was no longer visible, and it was now basically total darkness outside of the flashlights. He started to get a little nervous evidently, because he asked how far we were going to go, and he made a comment on the darkness. I kept feeling like someone was watching us, or like something was walking behind us, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but the empty snow path. About 10 minutes in, we finally found a spot where the trees were tall and full. Andrew ran around them in circles, looking for the best one. Marianne stayed closer to me, and whispered that she wanted to pick a tree fast because she had a weird feeling too. I got exactly what she meant. This was a lot creepier than I had imagined. Right then, I heard soft crunching behind us. It wasn't any of us, nor was it an animal. It sounded like boots crunching the snow, but very slowly, sneaking-like. When I turned around, I saw a man in dark clothes, standing about 20 feet back on the path. He wasn't dressed for the weather. His hands were bare and red from the cold. His jacket looked more like a windbreaker. His face looked pale and stiff, like he'd been out in the cold for way too long. Marianne grabbed Andrew's arm to pull him closer. When the man noticed we were looking at him, he suddenly smiled in an off-putting way and stepped closer. He asked if we were looking for a Christmas tree. His voice breaking the already unsettling silence was uncomfortable. His voice was deep and kind of soft. Before I could say anything, Andrew answered yes, excited again, and I felt a jolt of panic because I didn't want this man knowing anything about us. Marianne quickly told him no, that we were just walking. The man stepped closer again, and the way he moved made every hair on my arm stand up. He told us not to worry because he wasn't a park ranger. He said it like he could tell exactly why we lied, because admittedly, what we were doing was super illegal. I didn't want to talk to him at all. Something was wrong with him. He looked hungry or desperate or like he hadn't slept in days. I guess, for lack of a better word, he looked homeless. I told Marianne we should head back to the car, and she nodded, gripping Andrew's jacket. When we started walking past the man, he stood by, smiling and watching, giving slight nods as if to say goodbye as we walked. Andrew kept turning around, asking if the man was following, and we told him to stay facing forward. Every time I looked back, the man was a little bit closer than before, even though I didn't hear him speed up. I whispered to Marianne that when we reached the main road, we had to run to the car. She held Andrew's hand tighter and nodded without looking back. The man's steps stayed behind us the whole time, dragging a little like his boots were too big or too heavy. Once we got close enough to see the gap in the trees where the car was parked, I told them to go. Marianne lifted Andrew and ran as fast as she could. The only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of the axe in my hand, but I'm not a violent person and I've never had to resort to violence in my entire life. I turned around to block the path behind us for even just a second. The man had stopped walking and was just staring at me, and he put his hands up halfway, still smiling, and then he said, "I mean no harm. Why don't you get back to your truck now?" And I felt my heart skip a beat as he said this. He said truck, like he knew we came in a pickup truck. I replied back simply that we don't want any trouble. Then I turned and started hurrying back down to the lot. But halfway there, Marianne screamed my name, sounding panicked. Oh no, I thought. When I got to the truck, she showed me that both right side tires were punctured. I didn't have time to examine it for long to realize it was him. I told Marianne to call 911 immediately, but she struggled to find service at first. She walked around the snowy lot for a bit until there was reception. She never strayed too far away. I had Andrew wait in the truck, who was now clearly concerned as he watched Marianne and I freaking out. He was old enough to know something bad was happening. Marianne seemed to be having a hard time on the phone, so I took it and explained our location and that we felt threatened by a random man in the woods who may have potentially been responsible for the tires. Given the potentially unstable individual in the vicinity, and the fact that we had a child with us, police were taking this very seriously and told me to keep my family locked in the truck until police arrive and that a tow truck will be sent as well. I was instructed to keep the operator on the line while we waited, but eventually the line started getting choppy, cutting out at moments because of the poor reception. Then, Marianne suddenly screamed in my ear to look and pointed towards the tree line by the path we were on. There were multiple people standing just beyond the tree line. I counted at least 3. They looked like shadows from where we were, which made the sight even more terrifying. It was like we were being stalked and hunted. Then 2 of the people started walking closer. I told the operator, and she said something that really made me uncomfortable. She asked if I had any kinds of weapons, and when I said I had the axe, she implied that if it came down to it, to use it to defend my family. By this point, Andrew was crying, and Marianne tried to calm him down. I told the operator that 2 of the figures were still walking toward the truck. They weren't running or yelling or anything. They just walked very slowly, like they knew we weren't going anywhere. The 3rd figure strangely disappeared, likely back deeper into the woods away from the light. The operator told me the police were close, but I had no idea if that meant 2 minutes or 10. I kept looking back and forth between the tree line and the road in the distance, praying to see flashing lights. I tried to talk to the operator again, but the call dropped. The second it cut off, everything felt 100 times worse. I locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. I kept my hand on the axe, gripping it so hard my knuckles hurt. As the two people were now within range of hearing them speak, we could hear them saying, "We're here to help," as they waved their hands in the air. We didn't recognize either of them to be that guy from earlier. "Do you think they're park rangers?" Marianne asked, and I said firmly, "Not a chance." But perhaps I said it too loud because Andrew just started crying even more, which Marianne had to try extra hard to console him. These two people approaching were dressed similarly to that first guy, aka way underdressed, and their clothes looked worn out, almost dirty, and they didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. But then, seemingly randomly, the two of them turned around and started running back in the direction they had come from. We didn't know why just yet, but it was soon clear. Never have we been so ecstatic to hear the sound of police sirens. It was getting louder fast, and eventually we saw the flashing lights coming from down the road. Coming pretty fast, actually. The police SUV entered the lot with its spotlight on, and it instantly shined in our direction. I flashed my lights to try to get the cop in the car to see the men running back into the woods. At this point, though, they were already nearly gone. But their footprints weren't. Once the SUV was next to us, two officers jumped out immediately with flashlights drawn, and I got out to basically get on my knees thanking them. I pointed in the direction the men ran. I said they disappeared into the trees like they had rehearsed where to go. The police told us to stay inside the truck while they searched, and more units showed up within minutes. One officer stayed with us. Andrew was no longer scared, but rather once again excited at the commotion and the sight of police officers. After a long search, the police came back and told us what I already knew they were going to say. They didn't find anyone, just tracks in the snow that went deep into the woods and eventually spread out in different directions. They didn't know if the people lived somewhere out there or if they were part of some kind of camp deeper in the mountains. They said sometimes drifters or squatters stay hidden in remote areas during the winter. The tow truck eventually arrived, and the police stayed around us the entire time until our truck was loaded up. We had to sit in the back of a patrol car to stay warm while they finished everything. No one really said much. Marianne held Andrew in her lap, and I just stared out the window, watching the dark tree lines, half expecting to see someone standing there again. On the ride back home, none of us talked. It was like all of us were afraid that saying anything out loud would make it real again. We didn't try to cut down a Christmas tree ever again. We didn't even go back to that mountain area. Even now, 10 years later, I refuse to go anywhere near it. To this day, what scares me the most is the thought that they had been watching us long before we even noticed them. They saw us arrive in that parking lot because they knew to strand us by slashing my tires, and they were waiting for us to go deep enough into the trees so we wouldn't make it back to the truck. We were lucky we trusted our instincts enough and decided to leave for the truck almost right away. We were also lucky I was holding an axe, which may have dissuaded them from doing something crazy. I don't like thinking about how close we came to potentially never going home. I still think about this one night from when I was 9 years old. It was a few days before Christmas. My parents both had things to do that night, and since I was almost 9, they felt okay leaving me home for a little bit. My mom had to run to the grocery store to get some stuff for Christmas dinner, and my dad was working late like he usually did in December. I was sitting on the couch watching a Christmas movie probably, and eating cookies by the fireplace and tree. Outside, it was already dark, even though it was still relatively early, and I remember the Christmas lights flashing on the houses across the street. It was normal, until the doorbell rang. The only reason this made me stop and look was because it was rather late and random for someone to ring the bell, and my mom always told me never to answer the door when I was alone. My parents never ring the bell, obviously, since they have keys. I got up and walked to the door anyway because I wanted to look through the peephole. When I put my eye up to it, I saw there was a man standing on the porch wearing a Santa Claus suit. It was the full thing, too. The red coat, the hat, the beard, everything. But he didn't look like a normal, friendly Santa. He wasn't holding anything besides what looked like a clipboard, and he was standing way too close to the door like he was waiting for me to unlock it. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just kind of whispered, "Who is it?" The man moved his head a little closer to the door like he was trying to see through the peephole or hear me better, and in that moment, he figured out right away that I was a kid. He did, I guess, what was his best Santa impression, as he said he was Santa and that he had gifts for me, and that I should open the door. At 9 years old, I wasn't stupid, and I didn't believe in Santa anymore. My parents taught me about strangers. I told them to go away and that I didn't need anything, and I tried to sound brave, but my voice cracked. The man went silent for a second, and then he asked me if I was home alone. As soon as he said that, I knew to walk away. I instantly felt stupid for even letting him know I was home. I didn't answer him. I stepped back from the door and walked fast to the living room because I suddenly felt too scared to stand near it. I sat on the couch and grabbed a pillow and stared at the TV like acting normal would make the fear go away. But then I heard the doorknob twist. He was testing if the door was locked. I wanted to scream for help, but nobody was home. I waited and hoped he would leave. But a moment later, I heard another sound from the back of the house. It was the back doorknob twisting. It happened so fast after the front door that I bet he ran around the house to the back. That door was even weaker than the front one, and we almost never used it. I felt frozen in place, and all I could think about was that my house only had 2 doors and this man was trying both. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone and dialed my mom's number. When she answered, I started talking really fast, trying not to cry. I told her someone was trying to get into the house and he was dressed like Santa. My mom got serious right away and told me she was coming home right now and that I should not open any doors no matter what. She told me to stay in the living room and keep the curtains closed. I sat on the floor behind the couch where I couldn't be seen from any windows, and I stayed completely still. I kept hearing small noises outside, like footsteps or light taps, just some forms of sounds indicating that someone was still there. Eventually, they stopped, and not long after, I heard a car pulling into our driveway, and I knew it was my mom because I recognized her squeaking brakes. I stayed where I was until I heard the front door unlock and slam open. My mom came in breathing hard and holding 2 grocery bags. She locked the door behind her and yelled out for me, and I ran to her right away. She hugged me and then told me she had just seen a man dressed as Santa walking down our street. She said she slowed her car down when she saw him, and she yelled at him out the window asking what he was doing. The man told her he was going door to door asking for donations, but she didn't believe him for a second. She said he looked nervous, and that he walked away fast when she started yelling. My mom told me she was proud of me for not opening the door and for calling her right away. She called the police and reported the man, and I'm sure police at the very least surveyed the area. We never found out if he was arrested or if he just disappeared into the neighborhood. 2 neighbors did say, though, that the man knocked on their doors asking for donations, though they said it seemed like a scam. Regardless, that doesn't change the fact that he tried to get into our house, where he knew a little boy was home alone. I still think about that night every year around Christmas when I see Santa decorations. I just remember being 9 years old and knowing that man on our porch was not Santa and that he wanted something else. I guess I was lucky the doors were locked and my mom got home when she did. What would have happened if that door was unlocked is terrifying to think about.
So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you would expect to get on Thanksgiving night. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family. At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side. We never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something that most duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction. I only saw it open once before the 2 moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned before the lock would block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black. It seemed as if nobody was home, It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder, so me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. It was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before the scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex even to the other side as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window, being a sketchy snoop, when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed, and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later after our newgrown fear of those neighbors became too much. This happened when I was only 5 years old. It was Christmas Eve night, meaning I guess it was technically Christmas, and I had awoken at probably 3 a.m. or something. I walked downstairs to the living room out of my little boy curiosity to see if Santa had delivered any presents yet. The tree was full of presents underneath already. I was so happy. Santa had come already. But what was this? There was someone in the kitchen going through the fridge. I remember stepping into the kitchen and seeing a really tall man going through the fridge chugging a milk carton. When he spotted me, he put the carton back in the fridge and shut the door. He then put his fingers on his lips to tell me to be quiet. Are you Santa? I asked him. Yes, I am, he told me quietly. He walked past me, patted me on the head, and stepped into the living room next to the tree. I don't know what I was thinking, even at 5 years old, as he wasn't wearing anything even resembling Santa. He looked around at all the gifts. I thanked him for all the presents as he began picking up the bigger boxes. I remember being confused, and I'm pretty sure I asked him why he was doing what he was doing, but I don't remember exactly what he said. I believe it was along the lines of, just replacing the gifts with better ones in my sled. I believed whatever he said though. He walked out the back door with 3 boxes, came back momentarily to grab more, then left once again. He came back in and patted me on the back and told me not to tell my parents that I saw him. I smiled and agreed, and he took off with the boxes. I waited for him to come back with the replacement gifts, but he never did. I eventually went up to tell my parents despite what he said. When my parents realized I wasn't joking, they sat up in shock and fear and ran past me downstairs. When they saw half the presents were gone and the back door was left wide open, my mom screamed like a deranged person. I remember my parents were practically scolding me, demanding for me to describe the person who entered our house. Of course, being 5 years old, the description I gave was anything but useful. All I probably told them was that he was tall. It's been almost 15 years now though, and at this point for me, being that I was only 5 years old, it's nothing but a story to tell, rather than a bad memory at all.
Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys who would dress up as Santa Claus in the mall or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall with all of the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa sitting in a chair covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on the Santa's lap. Maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sat on his lap. Normally it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walked up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, he pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him, I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways, but halfway through, he stopped and told me we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me. But before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as the fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. So he and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did me. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock in the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus, but a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened.